No government is skating through this pandemic. It's a wicked challenge, no doubt. But 14 months into the crisis, amid extraordinary 180s, aggressive deflections, and one tearful apology from the Premier, the Ontario government's performance is taking heat from many quarters, including the Auditor General. With us now for more, let's introduce, in Cambridge, Ontario, Jeffrey Stevens, weekly political columnist for the Waterloo Region Record, who first covered Queen's Park, incidentally, in the 1960s. In Burlington, Ontario, Laura Stone, reporter for the Globe and Mail's Queen's Park Bureau. And in Mississauga, Ontario, Fatima Syed, freelance journalist and host of the political podcast on Canadaland called The Backbench. That's a good name for a podcast. Fatima, it's good to see you again. Laura, good to have you back on the program. Mr. Stevens, your debut on this program has been long overdue. We're glad to have you on. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine, Steve.
Glad to hear it. Well, let's put you to work right away because you, of course, talk to people. You read the polls. You have your own sense of things, having watched Queen's Park for so many years. How much confidence in your judgment does the current government of Ontario enjoy among the population?
Almost none.
That little?
Well, looking at the polls, yes, you've got a majority, a large majority of the population in Ontario disapproves of the way the government is handling its overall performance, and particularly its handling of COVID and the rollout of the vaccine program. And I think one of the polls just the last week or so showed that 69% of the people thought that Doug Ford had plenty of opportunity and notice of the third wave of pandemic and did nothing and take any action. One thing I would say that I watch all the provinces, and the Ford government is the second worst in terms of its acceptance by its public. Worst by far is Alberta.
That is what the polling suggests right now. Laura Stone, as you look at it, how much confidence do you think the government enjoys among the population right now?
Well, there's no doubt it's been an extremely difficult few weeks, stretching into a few months now for the Ford government. And it all sort of culminated in those very ill-conceived public health measures that the government announced in a very harried fashion on that Friday afternoon, in which they closed playgrounds and essentially would have allowed police to stop anyone on the street for any reason and demand their address. Obviously, the repudiation of those measures was extremely swift, starting with the police forces, but all sorts of different groups, including civil liberties associations and those representing racialized Canadians. I think that was sort of when the tide really turned. Of course, there's been controversy throughout this pandemic, and there's been ups and downs with the government. I think the last time I was on this show, we were talking about lockdowns and people growing increasingly tired of them, including the conservative base. And we know that there are many conservatives who are very dissatisfied with the way that the Ford government has approached this, but sort of from the opposite perspective of many people in the public who feel that the government should have acted sooner and stronger when it came to lockdowns. But how much lasting damage has been done? I mean, clearly it's been challenging, but we also have to remember that the election is not this June, it's next June. And so I think that the Ford government does have time, and I think they're looking towards the next campaign to kind of rebuild the Premier's image as after they've faced a very, very difficult few months here.
They say a week is a lifetime in politics, in which case we have almost 60 lifetimes before the next provincial election. That's always worth remembering when the polls get published. Fatima, how do you see it?
I think there's a lot of frustration and anger against Premier Doug Ford, but more so against the Conservative members of government as well. I think people have been trying to find a champion and a line of support throughout this pandemic, and they just haven't found it. I live in Peel Region, where 7 of the MPPs are Conservative members. Peel, as we know, is one of the hardest hit regions, not just in the province, but in the country. And I think people have felt the neglect and abandonment by those MPPs for not having their backs, for not going to bat for them, and for not supporting them when they needed them the most. So I think it's not just a problem with the leadership at the top, but it's a problem throughout, where Ontarians are really upset and frustrated with the lack of leadership that has been shown, especially during the third wave.
I don't have to tell any of you that one of the biggest and most tragic stories throughout the course of the pandemic has been the situation in long-term care in this province. And last week, we saw two pretty significant developments happen. First, the Auditor General, who is a neutral arbiter of things at Queen's Park, she came out with a report. And then the Premier's own appointed long-term care task force gave its findings as well. So two big reports coming out. And I guess I just like, Jeff, I know you've written a lot about this. I'd like you to just weigh in and tell us what you think some of the, I guess, one or two most important takeaways from those reports were that we should know about.
Well, I guess the main takeaway that is that the problem of the long-term care cannot be addressed or resolved at all until we put an awful lot more money into the system. It's got to be done. Got to, I guess, start with long-term care homes. Get rid of all those wards. Everybody in the long-term care needs to be in a private room with a private bath. That means rehabilitating all of the older multi-room ward systems, all of the older ones, and tearing down a bunch of them, which is going to be terribly expensive. I think we've got to do something about the inspection system, which has been a farce, frankly, and it's cut back more by the Ford government. No government has paid a whole lot of attention to proper inspection of long-term care for decades. It's been worse recently. Inspectors don't go out frequently when they should. They have a system of notifying the owners and operators of long-term care before they come, so people won't quickly bring in temporary workers, so it looks as though they've got more staff than they have. And they don't. They find things wrong. They don't follow up and chase it down. And if long-term care facilities are constantly violating the regulations, nothing happens. So that's if there are better inspections, that would help a great deal. But I think over the long term, Steve, what you really got to look at is shifting the emphasis away from institutional care, like long-term care homes, and getting more and more into home care. Take care of people at home, keep as many as you can out of long-term care. They'll do better at home. Their chances of survival are better. They'll enjoy a happier life. What's the average? They say somebody goes into long-term care, they're dead on average within 2 years. I think this is a lot better, survive a lot better if they can stay at home, closer to family, with regular care coming in to look after them.
Every poll I've seen says people would prefer to live and, frankly, to die at home as opposed to in institutional care. Laura, as you talk to people in the provincial government, clearly the long-term care system has been treated as, in some respects, like a poor second cousin in the healthcare family. Based on your conversations, based on your reporting, do you see any determination in the current government of Ontario to do something about all this?
Well, I think what we've seen throughout this pandemic, and particularly with the release of these reports, is just how completely sidelined the long-term care sector was, how unprepared they were. They were cast aside, and the stories coming out of the Commission's report are just devastating, and frankly, like they're hard to read, and they really pull at your heartstrings. They are so sad, the way that these staff would cry outside homes, the way these people died alone without family. It's seriously disturbing. I think that the Ford government, throughout this has seen how damaging this has been for them, and they are trying to do something about it. And we've seen many announcements about homes to be built and good news announcements in their minds. I mean, the trouble is that these are years, if not decades away. And the Ford government does have to answer for, as the professor mentioned, the lack of comprehensive inspections, why there was no preparation between the first and second wave, which I think the public views as inexcusable. And the minister has to take some responsibility for this. And we've seen a real resistance on her part. So yes, I think there's certainly a recognition that this needs to change and that there needs to be infrastructure built, but also the Commission talks about a wholehearted change in the way that the sector is run. While profit could play a part potentially in building these homes, that shouldn't be the sole purpose of running a long-term care home. So there is a lot of soul searching that needs to be done now. And I think this is going to be one of those major issues that dogs the government heading into the next election.
Fatima, as I get you to weigh in on this, I first want to play a clip. This is from Dr. Vivian Stamatopoulos, who's at Ontario Tech University in Durham Region. The minister whom Laura referred to is Minister Marilee Fullerton, herself a medical doctor back in the day. She's the minister responsible for long-term care. Let's hear what Dr. Stamatopoulos has to say, and then Fatima, I'll get you to weigh in on this. Let's have the clip if we can, Tony. Thanks.
Astounding. I watched the press conference and I listened to Colin DeMello, I listened to Mike Crowley, I listened to them to try to get her to accept some sort of personal responsibility. And there is none, nowhere to be found. Keep in mind, these families who I talk to on a day-to-day basis have not had an apology once for what happened, the worst humanitarian crisis in our collective long-term care history. And not one, I'm sorry, we messed up, we dropped the ball, when everyone around you is very clearly documenting the evidence of your flagrant failure.
Okay, Fatima, your view on this?
I mean, I can't say it better than she did, right? I think the report is extremely egregious and it screams for accountability and it screams for someone to acknowledge that something majorly bad happened. The story that sticks out to me from that report is the story of elderly people dying because they were dehydrated, that they didn't even get a chance to get some water. And when you hear stories like that, you want to know why that happened and why they were in a position for that to happen. And I think people are extremely angry that the Minister of Long-Term Care did not own any accountability, not even a broad apology of any kind. And we've been hearing about long-term carers for decades, if not longer. The problems have persisted over many, many years. They've only just manifested in the worst possible way during the pandemic. I think it's time for the government to stop passing the buck to previous governments and really just fix the problem. It's not that hard. Experts have been yelling for years that there needs to be a shift towards home care. There needs to be a shift towards maybe a public-private partnership model. And all the reports are there. All the data is there. It's just a matter of putting it in place and getting to work and fixing the problem.
Jeff, let's talk about the other major development last week, and that was almost after a full year of saying we don't need one, the government of Ontario, I guess relented would be the right word to use, and decided to bring in a paid sick days program. As a political move, how do you see it?
Well, I see it very much as a political move. It was dragged kicking and screaming into the sick day program because business didn't want it, and the Ford government tends to listen to business interests before it listens to its scientific experts, its medical experts, or even to the needs of the public. And that's been part of the problems that they've got. There should be proper sick leave. And when there's a pandemic, it should be reinforced. One of the problems is there's a bigger role for the federal government in all of this than it's playing. And I'm still waiting to see results of the Prime Minister's promise in September for a national strategy on home care and long-term care, and it hasn't come yet. Nothing's moving, and I don't think anything's going to happen on that. But this is not a local problem. We need 34 regional health authorities in Ontario. It's not just a provincial problem; it's a national problem. It needs to be addressed that way, and it needs to be addressed that way pretty quickly, I would think.
Laura, on the issue of paid sick days, it was becoming pretty apparent that this issue was not going to go away, and the opposition parties and so many other interest groups in society were beating this government like a drum on it. They finally brought a program in. Have they resolved it in terms of, it's being a political problem, the fact that they didn't have anything in place?
I don't think they've resolved it. I think that if they had done this a year ago, they would have gotten a lot more credit than they're getting now. I mean, it's pretty laughable, quite frankly, to come in a year into the pandemic. And as I pointed out to the minister in the press conference, pat yourself on the back for doing something about this. So, the government did relent. They did make a major U-turn here. And what I see is the Ontario government having a very large chip on its shoulder when it comes to this issue, because other provinces, in particular, they love to bring up the example of British Columbia, have not done this. And so they like to compare themselves to others and say, look, the NDP government in BC hasn't done it and we're doing it first. And they also love to bring in the example of the federal program, which Ontario says they helped negotiate, but which most people, everyone has said is fairly inadequate and cumbersome. So, I think they've tried to kind of put this to rest, and this is going to go ahead, but I don't think this absolves the government for the past year having done nothing on this issue and frankly having fought it tooth and nail, with the Premier calling this double dipping and a waste of taxpayers' money. I mean, those clips will live on. Those do not go away.
Fatima, I need something explained to me here, though, and that is the government is now promising, as a result of its volte-face of a week ago, or last week, 3 paid sick days. That's the plan. The science table and the health advisory table, these are the chief advisors that Premier Ford says he talks to. They've been advocating 10 paid sick days. If the government says we are listening to the scientists and we are taking the advice of the scientists, but they're bringing in a program of 3 days and not 10, how do they square that circle?
Well, they can't, because they're clearly not listening to the scientists and the doctors. If they had been reading any of the reports, they would have seen that a robust paid sick leave can help reduce COVID cases significantly. There was a study in the US that showed a good paid sick leave program can reduce coronavirus cases by 50%. We currently have 164 workplace outbreaks in Peel region alone. There are a lot of workers who won't be able to go to work because of that, and not all of them have paid sick leave. This is a problem, and has been a problem, as Laura said, for the past year. The government has just come out with the very bare minimum that won't even be effective. It's a temporary program, it's retroactive, and it doesn't help workers who have to take care of their families, who have to take more than 3 days off, and who can't, quite frankly, afford to take even 3 days off. So we're really giving credit to a government that has done the very, very bare minimum. And it's not going to help workers. Everyone from doctors to the workers themselves have been screaming that this is not helpful. So I think, it's a little too late for them to come out with this announcement. And moreover, it's a little obnoxious, quite frankly, for them to say that, oh, this is going to solve all our problems.
Jeff, if he's not taking the science table's advice, which he clearly didn't on this, whose advice is the Premier taking on this issue?
Well, I think he's hearing a lot, Steve, from his caucus. And what they are hearing from their constituents is that people are tired, they're resentful, they don't want any more restrictions, they want to get out of the parks, they want to play golf again, they'd like to go to restaurants and so on. They just had enough of this, and if they thought the government had moved more quickly, and if it were more serious in its attempts to control the pandemic, they might be more responsive. But they feel that they've been getting mixed signals from the government all along. Stay home, oh no, don't stay home. You can go shopping, no, you can't. Go to big stores only, but stay away from the little ones. It has not been clear, and I think the sense there is that I think what's going on now is it's happening too late, and God knows how this is going to play out. But I think we're in for a lot more trouble.
Laura, before I get you to weigh in, let's listen to the man who actually brought the policy in last week. Here's Labour Minister Monty McNaughton. Tony, that clip if we can.
Since the start of the pandemic, we've had workers' backs. We had their backs when Premier Ford negotiated with Prime Minister Trudeau a $1.1 billion fund for paid sick days last summer. We had their backs when we advocated to Ottawa for workers to have repeat access to the federal program, faster payments, and 20 paid sick days instead of 10. And we've got their backs again now.
These words that get used in these announcements don't happen by chance. These are very carefully chosen phrases. And Laura, maybe I could get you to weigh in on this. We've got their backs. We've got their back. We heard it several times there. What do you take from that?
I think this is an incredible turnaround for the government. This is a communications exercise. Again, we had the premier out repeatedly using the term double dipping when it came to sick days because there was this federal program. He was giving interviews where he said this was a waste of taxpayers' money and people don't want it. So to have that defense for the past year and then only to turn around and say that, this has been the government's goal all along, it's pretty disingenuous. So I think that shows me that they're feeling very, very vulnerable on this issue now. And they realize that the public tide has turned. Not just with unions or NDP supporters, which is probably what the government thought where this was coming from previously, but I think they're seeing that public opinion toward this issue has dramatically shifted, and they scrambled to get something done quickly because they've completely lost the room on the issue of paid sick days.
Let me pick up, Jeff, with you on that issue of public opinion, because sometimes when this government gets in trouble as it relates to public opinion, there's always the tried, tested, and true. Let's pick a fight with the feds. And the fight they're picking right now is on, quote unquote, the looseness of the borders. Doug Ford constantly saying things like, we want the prime minister to close down the airports and we want him to tighten things up because that's a way to get the number of positive test cases down. Do you think the public's buying the argument?
To a degree, I think. I think that's been one of the weaknesses of the federal government did not close the borders soon enough and let flights come in. And but I don't think that gets the Ford government off the hook at all. As you say, I mean, it's what happens when a provincial government gets in trouble. It attacks the federal government, and that works to a point. I don't think it's going to work now. I think the problem now is the public mood has set in, and it's going to be very hard to change that. It's almost like going back to the latter years of the Mulroney federal government and people after introduction of the GST, mood was set. There was just no way that it could have been reversed. And a year or so later, the federal government calls an election and they lose it very badly. I have the sense that the Ford government, it's locked in there. Now, if they got rid of Doug Ford and had a new leader, could they pull it out? Maybe. I don't know.
Well, let's hold off on that. We may come back to that issue later. But Fatima, again, on this issue of the feds versus the province, the provincial government has said a couple of things in particular. Don't blame us. We have inadequate supply of vaccines. Don't blame us. The federal government refuses to tighten the borders adequately. Do you think those arguments have any currency with the people of Ontario right now?
They don't. And it's because every time the Ontario government points fingers at the federal government, they're basically saying that they're not going to take any responsibility or enact their duty as a provincial government to protect their workforce, their residents, and their people. Every time the Ford government says that it's because of the borders that the variant's here, they're deciding that they're not going to take control of the variants that are already here, that are in the workplaces, that are in the community and spreading rapidly. Every time the federal government says that we don't have enough vaccine supply, it's the federal government's fault, they're saying, okay, well, we're not going to do anything to protect you. That's the message that Ontarians are getting. And that is a dangerous message for the Ford government politically because it just builds anger against them. But it's also a dangerous message because it leaves a huge community of people unprotected. And unfortunately, the people who are suffering the most are the workers who are largely racialized. They are the immigrant community who are facing the brunt of the Ford government's language against borders. They are the low-income neighborhoods that are being left to fend for themselves with no provincial policies.
Let's get into some exploration here now about, boy, this is one of these great agenda, let's look at this from 30,000 feet in the sky questions, but it's fascinating to me. I want to know what it means to be a conservative today. Because, every government in the country, doesn't matter if you're a liberal, conservative, New Democrat, or what, everyone's in favor of massive spending in order to protect the population from the ravages of COVID-19. Deficits be damned, spend what it takes in order to fight this. Under traditional circumstances, Laura, conservatives don't believe in spending whatever it takes at any time, to hell with deficits, to tackle problems. So what does it actually mean to be a conservative in Ontario and or Canada today?
I don't know that I can answer that question in the time that we have, but I think it has been pretty incredible to watch. even if you compare Alberta and Ontario, and Jason Kenney throughout this has really resisted restrictions. We've seen his caucus push back very publicly against the idea of lockdowns. And it's incredible to me that they all kind of end up in the same place. I mean, Alberta, where cases are skyrocketing now, Jason Kenney's musing about a curfew. We have some pretty severe restrictions, at least regionally. They haven't done the province-wide restrictions that Ontario has done. And it just seems like, the public appetite for this in Canada is not to be wide open like Florida, even though there are many Conservatives that would have preferred that, I'm sure, or that maybe probably took a trip down south and stayed there for a few months throughout the toughest times. So I think there's a recognition that this is a public health emergency, and even if Conservatives don't like what they're seeing spending wise, I think they understand that the majority of the public wants this, and they want restrictions because they believe COVID-19 is serious and they want the government to be leading on it. So I'm sure there are a lot of them who are biting their tongues and waiting for this to be over, like all of us are, and very critical of the Liberals on vaccine procurement, for instance. And that's where they're targeting their anger and angst, because they want this to end as quickly as possible. And they're looking forward to the next few months as the pandemic recovers in the fall or winter, to returning to kind of those conservative ideals of restraint. So it will be interesting to see the turnaround in this as the pandemic hopefully ends, or is significantly improved by the fall.
Indeed. Jeff, you got a thought about what it means to be a Conservative in Canada today?
Certainly not what it once meant. Of course, given the pandemic, the Conservatives have not had a whole lot of choice except to go along with the need to basically try to spend. Governments have to spend their way out of this whole crisis by providing income support to workers, to businesses, and to do whatever you have to do to get the supplies that are required, and the vaccinations program, and so on. And it's going to cost, I think, even the Conservatives will realize that we've got to do some more in the future, including making sure that Canada has the ability to produce its own serums and for future pandemics. All governments have taken responsibility, or have not taken it, but should take responsibility for the fact that we don't have any manufacturing facilities in this country anymore since they got rid of the Connaught labs. Decades of neglect on all parts, and I think Conservatives are now recognizing that. The problem is that it's not very fashionable right now to be a Conservative. I think that Mr. Ford and Mr. Kenney together have damaged the brand, and it's going to take a while for that to come back.
In which case, let's come full circle here and follow up on the rather mischievous suggestion that Jeff made a little while earlier, which was, and Fatima, I'll go to you first on this. Are you hearing any serious rumblings, either in cabinet or from the backbench, from those who believe that the only way for the Conservatives to win the next election is to replace the Premier? We know that's something that both opposition leaders, all three opposition leaders, frankly, have asked for. Any serious rumblings that you're hearing?
I personally haven't. I know there was some chatter a little while ago, especially in the lead up to the Premier's apology a few weeks ago, when he, apologized for closing playgrounds and, enhancing police powers to the point of allowing carding. But I think the bigger question is, can this government continue till the end of the pandemic with Premier Ford at the helm? A lot of mistakes have been made, and no accountability has been taken. So the question moving forward for the Ontario Conservative cabinet, that is do they have the right leader in place to carry both the province and the government to the end of the pandemic? And at this point, I'm not sure if they can answer that with an assertive yes.
Well, Laura, Fatima says no accountability has been taken. I've heard the Premier on numerous occasions say the buck stops with me. I take responsibility for government policy. He, like every Premier in this country, has made some mistakes. He also had a tearful apology, I guess, just last week. about his role in all of this. Are you hearing any genuinely serious complaints from the backbench that suggest that the Premier could lose his job over this?
I think there's certainly dissatisfaction in Conservative circles over how this has been handled, but the dissatisfaction is sort of disparate. It's either, there's been too many lockdowns, or cabinet made the wrong decisions, they panicked. I don't think it's clear. I don't think there's a clear narrative over why people are upset. Certainly the Premier looks weaker now than he has since at least the first year in his government, which was extremely rocky. But I think you also have to remember that the Premier Ford is not a partisan Conservative. He doesn't have roots in the party in the same way that some of the other members of cabinet do. He's kind of one of those outsiders who came in, although he obviously has a family history in the party. He brought all these kind of different sides into the party. It's not just Conservative voters who supported him. So, I can't say whether there's anything serious going on, but I think that there's probably a recognition that he's the one that brought them here to this majority government, and this is still a majority government. And unless there's other very serious missteps post-pandemic, I would be surprised if Premier Ford was replaced, but I've been surprised before. So,
as we all have. Jeff, last 30 seconds to you on this question.
Answering what? What I hear comes not from caucus or the cabinet so much as it is from people out in the riding associations, the organizers there, the people who have to go and I guess they can't knock on doors so much now, but certainly trying to round up support, raise money for the party, and the level of unrest and unhappiness among those people is a good deal higher than it is among the caucus and certainly the cabinet. I think a lot of the cabinet ministers are just glad to have those jobs, and they wouldn't have Doug Ford hadn't had his coattails there for them to ride into the office. And I think there is a sense in the party that it should be doing a lot better than it is. That they have a leader who is not providing the strength that they had hoped. And I think they worry most of all that they're going to lose the next election unless they do something else. And that unrest may do something. I don't know. My guess is probably between now and a year from now, there'll be a fairly serious attempt somewhere along the line to get rid of the leader and replace him.
The three words we should never use in journalism. Time will tell. Thanks to Jeffrey Stevens, Laura Stone, and Fatima Syed for joining us on the agenda tonight. Be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.